The Atlantic Division has been the class of the Eastern Conference over the last few years. On today's show, we discuss, despite the Panthers' injuries to start the season, how it can be an advantage for them to get back to the postseason.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, July 17th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, what a great week it was last week to go to the Ice Den in Coral Springs and get to witness the prospect, the development camp, and see all the prospects play in the scrimmage on Friday. And it was just great to be back home. And one thing that hasn't been advertised for, at least for now, I haven't seen too many advertisements there, is that the Amerigold LatAm Cup is actually coming back to the Ice Den later in August 23rd to the 27th. I wanted to make sure that got on the podcast immediately, as we are just over a month away from it. That was one of the few things that I first saw when I entered the Ice Den last week, and I wanted to make sure that all of you guys were made aware of it in case you guys wanted to make your way there later next month. And it's some hockey to watch while we're waiting for training camp rosters to be announced and prospect showcase as well, which we don't know if the Florida Panthers are hosting it yet. They might wait until next year to host it when the War Memorial Auditorium opens too. So it might not be hosted in South Florida this year. We still don't know. Also, in some Florida Panthers news, defenseman John Ludwig and the Florida Panthers have agreed to a 2-year, 2-way contract. Played 54 games last season, struggled with injuries the last few years, but has been a consistent stay for the Charlotte Checkers this year. Was a plus 18 as well for whatever that it's worth there as far as plus minus goes. And definitely a big contributor to the Charlotte Checkers in their playoff run, and their after exiting in the second round of the Calder Cup playoffs. So, but also, if you're watching on the YouTube, you see that I have a new office here, and it's actually my bedroom. I had to transition from my normal office to here based on that was an empty room for the last 8 months, and now getting a roommate who's going to occupy that room. So instead of just an empty office with just the desk to podcast, we're transitioning it over to, for now, my bedroom, where you see I have a little bit of sports memorabilia here, some rally towels and all that for Florida Panthers, Florida Marlins, Dolphins, and you can see here, put my credentials there for the times that I've gone to Panthers games as well, as far as being in the press as well. So that's where I put my credentials every single time I go down. So a little bit of a taste of the memorabilia that I have here, and there's a little bit more on that side that you can't see in the camera as well. So a little bit of a different taste for the YouTube crowd, but there, because we were so busy with the development camp stuff last week, we didn't even really get to discuss a big trade in the division that happened last week. And of course, the Panthers were reportedly possibly in on Alex DeBrincat. With how they managed the trade deadline in their President's Trophy winning season, it was always going to be difficult to put a trade package that would send Alex DeBrincat to the Florida Panthers. And what a trade that ended up being for the Chicago Blackhawks when in the 2022 draft, they had no first round picks and they ended up getting 3 out of it when trading DeBrincat out, a 2-time 40 goal scorer, undersized guy as well, has a wicked sniper who can snipe the puck as well. That they were able to get Kevin Korchinski out of it, who spent a season in junior and is probably going to be in the mix for the Chicago Blackhawks come this season. And for them, Connor Bedard just signed his ELC now that he turned 18 years old. And what a time that my friend Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks is having as well, with Connor Bedard signing his ELC. And it's Open Championship week too. So as a golf fan myself, he is a golf fan himself. He must be on cloud nine. I know I am, just on the Open this week as well. Do not miss going to the station to cover the Open Championship, going at like midnight to cover it until 12 noon, 1 p.m., somewhere around there. If you haven't listened to the show for a long time, I used to work in golf television, so don't miss getting up that early and working those overnight shifts. But going back to Alex DeBrincat and all, the trade itself is, you think about the process of Pierre Dorian throughout that and the desperation to win, especially with an ownership change as well. And what you gave a lot, the value was always going to go down. Especially because he had a down year to his standards after getting 2 straight 40-goal seasons. The asset wasn't going to be as rich as what you were wanting to get out of it over what you originally traded for. And the fact that now there's a lot of power in a lot of these RFAs of using your power to say, I'm going to sign a long-term extension here, I'm not going to sign a long-term extension there. Michigan man forced his way to Detroit, and even the conditions of the pick, the Ottawa Senators are going to get the later of the Senators pick, and I believe they have Boston's pick as well. It's either Detroit's later pick or Boston's that the Detroit Red Wings got from the Bertuzzi trade. So Ottawa's going to get one of those along with their own. So it's not looking like a good trade for the Ottawa Senators. And if Pierre Dorian's probably in his last season, and they have to make the playoffs for them, and with a new ownership coming in the mix, they have no attachment towards them, and it's going to be a really tough time for the Ottawa Senators to navigate through this. They are in on Vladimir Tarasenko, but if they sign Vladimir Tarasenko, who's not coming from the division, and Alex DeBrincat getting shipped in the division as well, I mean, they traded for Dominic Kubalik, who's a pretty good middle six winger that could be part of the mix, play for the Chicago Blackhawks as well. Even crazy how they all tie together. But it's for the Red Wings, it raises their floor for this upcoming season. Makes the division a lot tougher. Tarasenko coming in, if he in fact does sign with Ottawa. We talk about those 3 teams within the division of the rebuild, the teams coming out of the rebuild: Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit. It makes it that much tougher for the Florida Panthers there to navigate. And despite the injuries, actually, they're very fortunate that, as far as Detroit and Ottawa per se, that most of their games in the division for them don't come until the latter half of the season. I mean, they play their first game against the Red Wings on November 2nd, and then their other games happen in January, March, and twice in March for games against Ottawa, late November, and then February, and then 2 times in April too. So despite the injuries, you still have those division games mashed up in the latter part of the season. I mean, that's been like that for the last few years as far as schedule structure, and that actually could favor the Panthers as well. So I think that if there's a team that won this trade, I believe it's Detroit. They have the better goaltending. As far as the top 4, I like a healthy Ottawa Senators blue line a little bit better than Detroit. I do like the forward lines for the Detroit Red Wings are not as top heavy as Ottawa, but I do think that adding an Alex DeBrincat does in fact raise their floor, and it creates a little bit more competition for the Panthers. And with the injuries that the Florida Panthers are having a Brandon Montour and Aaron Ekblad later in the season is definitely something that really benefits Florida there. And we're going to continue that conversation more in segment number 3. But before, we're going to talk about in segment 2 how players forcing themselves out of certain situations, do we see a possibility that the Panthers could benefit once again? We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel. And take your first swing at MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on everything from the money line, over, under, who you think is going to get the first home run. It's all in the app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get up to $200 on bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Segment number 2 here on this Monday, July 17th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So there's been history of going back decades of players who have forced their ways out of teams in order to get where they want to. And listen, I wish the one thing that makes the NBA so popular is player movement and of course marketability. And of course, with the way contracts are structured in the NHL with long-term deals, it's a little harder for the players to get moved, especially with the amount of no move clauses there are. I mean, Nazem Kadri was rumored to get moved. I mean, he has only 6 years left on his contract, and he said, "Oh, I played in Toronto for 10 years. I'm used to the noise." So I love that response out of Kadri. Recently, we saw someone like Pierre-Luc Dubois force himself out of Columbus and then forcing his way out of Winnipeg as well. But history has repeated itself before. Marty St. Louis forcing himself out of the Tampa Bay Lightning, going to New York Rangers after Steve Yzerman did not select them for the 2014 Olympic team as well. So that's so hard to swallow when your own GM doesn't choose you. Florida Panthers related, Pavel Bure forcing himself out of Vancouver and then ending up in Florida, where we saw a 58 and 59 goal season, and then eventually the Florida Panthers getting to the playoffs in 2000 before eventually being swept by the New Jersey Devils. Jaromir Jagr is one when he was with Pittsburgh. And it's crazy to think that today's age of the Pittsburgh Penguins, if I told you that the Pittsburgh Penguins were going through financial troubles in the late 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s, you wouldn't believe me. But there was relocation rumors as well. Jagr tried some trade requests twice out of there before eventually getting traded. And crazy to think that some of the sports franchises in this day and age, you were wondering if they were going to be relocated. I mean, another example in another sport is the San Francisco Giants. There was a time where they were rumored to be relocating, and when they played at Candlestick Park, and now look at their beautiful ballpark out in the Bay, McCovey Cove, and they're gonna be a team that stays. And probably one of the most famous ones, Eric Lindros, before he played even an NHL game, drafted by the Quebec Nordiques and saying that he's not going to play a single game for them as well. And then eventually being traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. And then towards the end of his tenure in Philadelphia, ended up getting traded to the New York Rangers, eventually forcing his way out of there. And then another one, Patrick Waugh, who didn't get along with the interim head coach, Mario Tremblay, there in 1995, kept him in for an 11-goal route of the Montreal Canadiens, and went to the locker room after he was pulled and said he was never going to play for the Montreal Canadiens again, and then ended up being traded to Colorado. That year they win the Stanley Cup, unfortunately, against the Florida Panthers that year. So there's been many situations in NHL history that have seen players, whether they're superstar status or not, or at least star status, that we've seen. And recently, the Florida Panthers have been that benefit in Matthew Tkachuk, and Matthew Tkachuk going at it saying, "Hey, I'm not going to sign long term here, but I'm willing to help you guys out for your future." And the Panthers, we're coming up on just a few days of the 1 year anniversary of that trade, which we're going to have a special Saturday edition of the show, where we're going to discuss our reactions then, how we feel about now, obviously, which I am expecting positive reactions out of it. If you guys want to comment on the YouTube channel about how you're feeling now, how you felt then, and even in between, go far away, and we might read them on the show as well. So, and you wonder, with the success of the Panthers, you wonder if the Cats are in a position to have another player force their way out and come to South Florida. Of course, we discussed multiple times about the no state income tax, the weather, which it's crazy. Just even after I tweeted this out in my personal account, only in Florida, where you go into a rink with a hoodie on, and then immediately when you go outside, you're in a rush to take off the hoodie because it's so hot. But it's crazy because the amount of players in D camp who also spoke about one thing consistently. That was a consistent answer: weather, weather, weather. That listen, I didn't grow up in cold. A lot of you haven't neither. So a lot of people get tired of the 6 months of cold, shoveling their yards, having to turn on their car 15 to 20 minutes before having to drive as well. So it creates that simpler lifestyle for someone when they come down here. So that's the one thing to consider. I mean, I do think the Noah Hannafin conversation about a possible trade is over for now. It depends on where they're going as far as future cap space, LTIR space, which there's 7 teams right now over the cap, over the 83.5 million. The Florida Panthers are not one of them. So make of that what you will in how they're going to handle Brandon Montour, Aaron Ekblad going into the start of the season. And there's some bonuses going on their books. The only bonuses that the Florida Panthers are having on their book is $212K on their salary cap, and that's really nothing, really. But as far as the 30 million coming into next year, we're going to actually discuss that on a future episode, on not to get married to that 30 million that the Panthers have at their disposal because of the amount of contracts that are coming off the book. And I did a calculation which made me cringe a little bit, that I'm going to discuss more in a future episode later this week, about just not getting married to it as well. So it could possibly force someone here, as especially if they are a rental as well. So we could see that as a position for the Florida Panthers to be in, as far as making another run. And if they need some reinforcements, which they unfortunately didn't have in once they got to the Stanley Cup final, we saw the depth of that fourth line for the Vegas Golden Knights, and even their bottom pair defense that was just so tough to play with, super physical, which you understand once again why the Florida Panthers made these moves for so many left shot D as well, and even the forward lines of Steven Lorentz and Evan Rodriguez, who are guys who are mean and get in your face. And by the way, Steven Lorentz, his jersey number has been released on what he's going to wear, and he's going to wear number 11 this season. And I saw that, I chuckled, and then I went to go see the comments, and the comments are, there's something for that. As far as that, of course, former Panther Jonathan Huberdeau was the last player to wear number 11, and I just before I even looked at the comments, I was like, "Oh, that's really tough." But hey, um, that's what happens when you trade someone. I know he was here for 10 years, but it's just a little tough to see at the same time, but also a little funny all at the same time. But hey, Stephen Lawrence has the freedom to choose whichever jersey number that is available to him as well. But in segment number 3, we're going to discuss if the Panthers could benefit from the how strong the Atlantic Division is, and also with it being the class and facing off against Metro Division and Western Conference teams early on in the season. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Monday, July 17th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I said in segment 1, talking about how the floor of the Detroit Red Wings has risen a little bit since bringing in Alex DeBrincat. And it's got me wondering with how the Metro Division is looking as well. Is there a possibility for the Florida Panthers to get a little bit of luck based on how it looks on paper? Again, we're talking about on paper, but nobody expected the New Jersey Devils to take the leap that they did. So there might be that unexpected team in the Eastern Conference who might make that jump and surprise all of us, because I did not have the New Jersey Devils as a playoff team this year. But now that standard for them and how everyone perceives them has changed a bit. And I will say, I'm a little worried about the New York Rangers. I know they have Blake Wheeler there into the mix who can get you 10 to 15 goals a season. The backup in Jonathan Quick, which you might have to play Igor Shesterkin like 65 games there, and you might have him tired out. I mean, in the Western Conference, you're wondering if Jake Ottinger is going to play. His workload is going to be less, so that by the time the Dallas Stars get to postseason, that he is not tired out. And I think that the Dallas Stars are a team that could definitely make it to the Stanley Cup final this coming year. Not an official prediction as of yet. Still a little bit of off season to go, as in how the defense market especially changes with a possible Erik Karlsson trade, which we can also get into a future episode in there as well. There's plenty of summer to talk about the status of the Eastern Conference as well. But I'm a little worried about the Rangers. I was so high on them, but going into the postseason, but so disappointed in as far as what it was revealed with Patrick Kane's injury as well, that he wasn't his normal self. How the development of Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere has not gone to the standard that they had hoped. But the only real lock in that division is Carolina to make the playoffs, in my opinion. New Jersey is a little bit of a wild card, but I'm more leaning towards them making it to the dance as well. And as far as Metro Division teams, listen, I know Pittsburgh has had issues as far as depth, but arrested Sidney Crosby and a long offseason for them compared to normal years might give them a reason to be rejuvenated coming into this season. And who knows? And a healthy Tristan Jarry could very well have them in that top 3, which we spoke about players forcing themselves out in the last segment. Another player that could find themselves traded mid-season is possibly John Gibson. And I don't know why I see John Gibson in Buffalo. I don't know why I see it, but I think that the Buffalo Sabres are going to be looking for a goalie in the trade deadline, because you're going to trust a youngster in Devin Levi, as prize of a prospect as he is, and a World Junior silver medal, a guy that the Panthers identified in the 7th round as part of and then got Sam Reinhart out of it. Him, Eric Comrie, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, that's a very young tandem there, and you're taking a big risk as much promise as someone like Devin Levi has, and that could possibly raise their floor as well and get them maybe in that wild card. And they were in it until the last 3 or 4 games of the season, and the team, man, a lot of guys just have great north-south games, especially Tage Thompson for how big he is too, and can score from anywhere. And the fact that you brought in some leadership in Eric Johnson as well. They brought back their captain Kyle Okposo, even though he's playing on the 4th line. There are some mentorship to that young group as well, and taking a little bit of minutes off of Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power too, that they aren't they're not going to be overwhelmed by the moment. And guys who could be taking a leap in Jack Quinn there, who had a great season in the AHL 2 seasons ago with the Rochester Americans, which I believe the Sabres just announced that their new ECHL affiliate is the Jacksonville Icemen. So a little bit of a reworking as far as ECHL affiliates within the Atlantic Division too. So there's a little bit of an update. So now you have 3 in the state of Florida that are ECHL affiliates that belong in the Atlantic Division, as far as the Everblades with Florida, the Orlando Solar Bears with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Jacksonville Icemen now with the Buffalo Sabres. So I'm not saying that the Panthers, I'm not going to make a prediction of where the Panthers will finish, but we spoke about that back end, which is mostly Atlantic Division teams. And when you get the reinforcements back in Ekblad and Montour, assuming that they're healthy, and with that, you're getting them, and it worked for the Panthers last year where they got healthy at the right time. Duclair coming back in February, Bobrovsky coming back in game 3 against the Boston Bruins, and then carrying the Panthers from there, getting that 3 weeks of rest. This could give an opportunity for someone like Aaron Ekblad to possibly be back to his Norris Trophy self, his Norris Trophy caliber self, excuse me. Because before those injuries, even in 2021 and 2022, he was playing at that level. And we didn't see any of that in 2023 because of how early he got hurt too. And chances are it could favor the Panthers. You're getting your West Coast trips out of the way too. That's another thing. The Metro Division is on paper not as strong. I don't think the Islanders are making the playoffs. I just don't think that they are, especially with the fact that you're just having Ilya Sorokin just carry them every single night, and it's just a hard brand of hockey to watch too. if I'm being honest, as well. Washington, we still don't know what's going on with Evgeny Kuznetsov as well, and they're just going into a direction where they're just holding on because of the record that Alex Ovechkin is trying to break as far as goals. I believe he's like 70, 80 away, so it's going to be another few seasons until he does. So Columbus is still trying to build back their prospect pool as well. So chances are that coming into the 2023-24 season, we could very well see 5 Atlantic Division playoff teams make it. So, and who knows, we could be very well in the position of 2021, 2022, where there's a 30-point gap in between the last wild card and the first team out too. I mean, it was basically November where the playoff races were over and you were just fighting for positioning. I mean, yeah, the Panthers were way ahead of everyone in on their way to the number 1 seed in the East and getting the President's Trophy. But who's to say that it can't happen again this season? I mean, if there's one thing that the NHL has really over any league, it's parity. That's also another thing. So I could be wrong in this sense as well. as far as how close teams could be as well. But maybe that was just uh, one year that was just a rare one as far as teams having that much of separation between one another, and it just goes down to record from one division over the other, and even Western Conference teams beating up on others as well. So on the Eastern Conference teams, I mean, and the Metro Division. So we could very well see 5 of them, and the Florida Panthers with facing mm, having a big part of their schedule as Western Conference teams and Metro, and that they don't play the tough games as far as on paper in the latter part of the season. This very well could help them out as they're trying to just at this point they're just trying to take this week by week, month by month, and now that we've seen an extended run for the first time in 2.5 decades, at least for me, it's a more patient approach as far as getting through different parts of the season. Of course, we speak about the first benchmark with American Thanksgiving, so it's going to be different periods of reevaluation about where the team is. If they're out of it, it's going to be I'm going to hopefully the criticism of the fan base towards the coaching staff isn't as strong as it was last season, and there's a little bit more understanding of where they are health wise as well. So that's another thing to consider as far as the Panthers just trying to get through different parts of the season. Just and it's also great competition for the blue line as well, and there won't be shortage of opportunity as well for these guys. They know that they're going to get their chances. And who knows, with a chip on a lot of these guys' shoulders, an older Kulikov, a Mike Riley who played 10 games, who was just part of a cap crunch in Boston, that could definitely spark something for those guys as well. So maybe this could be a good situation for the Panthers after all. So and it could result in them being part of maybe those five teams as far as making it to the postseason next year. So thank you guys as always for listening to this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Uh, Make sure to come back on Wednesday for Wednesday's edition of the show, where it's a Winans Wednesday. Jacob Winans will be back, and we'll be discussing more on the state of the Florida Panthers. So in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. They could make it the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So Armando Velez signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.